Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that it took 3 years of sacrifice and hard work to build the Kirtland Temple, and that women and children crushed pieces of china and mixed them into the stucco so the temple would sparkle in the sunlight? Learn why the early saints called the temple the Lord's house, and how the Kirtland Temple served as a house of prayer, a house of faith, a house of learning, a house of order, a house of glory, and a house of God. Out of the tens of millions of people who have worn an American military uniform since the Civil War, only 3,525 have been awarded the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, that statistic alone just really forces you to pause, you know?
It really does, because, well, we throw around words like hero and bravery all the time in everyday conversation.
Right, like describing someone standing up for themselves or taking a career risk.
Exactly. But today we're looking at a threshold of courage that completely defies our basic hardwired instinct for self-preservation. So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive.
We've got a really fascinating stack of sources today.
Yeah, we're pulling from official military citations, historical congressional records, demographic databases, all to figure out what the absolute peak of human bravery actually looks like.
And, to understand that, it requires a profound shift in how we view human behavior.
Because it's not just a standard award, right?
Not at all. When we examine the sources outlining the criteria for the Medal of Honor, which, by the way, is often called the Congressional Medal of Honor because it's awarded by Congress and presented by the president, we're moving way beyond standard military duty.
Right. The official language is just incredibly weighty.
It really is.
Yeah.
It mandates that an individual must distinguish themselves conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity.
I mean, just those words alone.
Yeah, and it explicitly requires personal bravery, self-sacrifice, a clear risk of life, and action against an enemy.
I want to linger on that phrasing for a second, specifically the requirement to go above and beyond the call of duty.
Right, that's the key.
Because think about human biology for a second. We are fundamentally programmed for survival. Every instinct we have screams at us to, avoid incoming fire.
To run away, yeah. Preserve your own life.
Exactly. But the criteria for this medal essentially demand that a person completely override their own biological hardware.
Which is, well, it's almost unthinkable for most of us.
Right. Let's unpack this for you listening. This isn't just an Employee of the Month plaque. Doing what you are strictly ordered to do, even in combat, just isn't enough.
No. You have to take a step into this void of danger that no commanding officer could legally or morally demand of you.
Yeah.
And that conscious decision to step into that void is the defining mechanism of the award.
And it applies to all the branches, right?
It does. Structurally, the military recognizes this standard through 3 different versions of the medal. There's one for the Army, one for the Air Force, and one for the Navy.
And the Navy one covers the Marines and Coast Guard too, right?
Exactly. The physical design of the medal might vary, but that intense threshold of valor remains identical across the board.
So to really grasp how that threshold operates in the real world, we need to move past the abstract language.
We need to look at the actual people.
Yeah, right. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the origins of this award by looking at 3 extraordinary, wildly different Civil War recipients.
Which makes sense, since the medal was first established during the Civil War by a joint resolution of Congress.
Yeah, it gives us the perfect starting point. We get to see how the baseline for gallantry was originally set.
And those very first medals were awarded on March 25, 1863.
Okay.
They went to Army Private Jacob Parrott and 5 of his comrades for an operation that is, honestly, almost difficult to comprehend.
Right. The sources detail this, and it's wild. It's known as the Great Locomotive Chase.
It is a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare and calculated risk.
Yeah.
So Private Parrott and nearly 24 other Army volunteers were tasked with infiltrating deep into Confederate territory.
Like deep behind enemy lines.
Right. Their objective was to cripple the enemy's infrastructure by destroying bridges and railroad tracks between Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm just trying to visualize the sheer mechanics of pulling this off. This is the mid-19th century.
Yeah, no radios, no modern communication.
They are completely isolated, and the sources say they made their way into the Atlanta area and just boarded a northbound train posing as regular passengers.
Just sitting there. completely surrounded by the enemy, maintaining absolute composure.
Which is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, when the train stops and the regular passengers get off, Parrott and his crew execute what is essentially a military train heist.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A mid-19th century train heist.
Basically, yeah. They hijack the locomotive straight out of the station.
Wow.
The tactical execution is just incredible. They immediately uncouple the engine and the fuel car from the rest of the passenger compartments.
So the enemy can't follow them on the same train.
Exactly. And to prevent immediate pursuit, they even dismantle 3 boxcars right there on the tracks before taking off northward.
Okay, but I have to push back on the traditional perception of valor here.
How so?
Well, when we think of the Medal of Honor, the default image is usually a soldier charging a machine gun nest, or, I don't know, throwing themselves on a grenade.
A direct combat scenario.
Right. But this operation was covert sabotage. They were actively trying to run away from the enemy to complete the mission. So how did this act of, strategic retreat and sabotage become the baseline for the medal?
What's fascinating here is that you have to evaluate the exponential nature of the risk they took.
The risk of being caught.
Yeah. Valor isn't exclusively defined by the volume of gunfire you face. It's defined by the conscious acceptance of fatal consequences to gain a strategic advantage.
Oh, I see.
Because they infiltrated deep behind enemy lines, Parrott and his men knew they were outside the bounds of traditional combat. If captured, they wouldn't be treated as standard prisoners of war.
They'd be spies.
Exactly. They faced the very real threat of being executed as spies.
Right.
They accepted that near certainty of death or severe captivity just to sever those supply lines.
And, well, the inevitability of that risk did catch up with them. They tore up tracks and damaged bridges as they fled, but a steam engine eventually runs out of fuel.
Right. They had to abandon the locomotive.
They fled on foot through hostile territory, got hunted down and captured. They had to endure a horrific 19th century military prison before Parrott was finally returned in a prisoner exchange in March 1863.
Which brings us right back to the core requirement. Self-sacrifice. They volunteered to become hunted men.
Yeah.
Their actions prove that the highest tier of bravery can be calculated, silent, and deeply strategic.
And that concept of conscious choice sets up a really fascinating contrast with our next source material. Because while Parrott's story is about covert sabotage, the medal also recognizes raw, highly visible battlefield sacrifice.
It does. And looking at the historical records brings up a crucial demographic reality about who has actually earned this honor.
The numbers are pretty stark. I want to share this with you listening because the sources document that among the recipients, there are 88 African Americans, 59 Hispanic Americans, 33 Asian Americans, 32 Native Americans, and 9 unknown soldiers.
The data really paints a picture of an evolving military landscape.
Right, and I want to dig into the significance of those numbers. Today, an integrated military is standard. But during the Civil War, and for decades after, the U.S. was deeply segregated.
Institutional racism was just an everyday reality.
Exactly. Yet the criteria for the Medal of Honor seemingly bypassed those societal prejudices. The standard of valor forced the nation to recognize heroism in populations it frequently marginalized.
And that historical context is precisely why the story of Army Sergeant William H. Carney is so vital.
He was the very first Black recipient of the award, right?
Yes, he was. His actions during the assault on Fort Wagner represent the absolute extreme of physical endurance and visible leadership.
The assault on Fort Wagner was, the sources describe it as essentially a meat grinder.
It was devastating. Carney was crawling up the hill toward the walls of the fort under intense artillery and small arms fire.
And his entire citation revolves around him protecting a single object, the American flag.
Yes. He suffers several severe gunshot wounds during this advance. His body is effectively being torn apart by lead.
Oh.
But he refuses to drop the colors. He continues to physically push forward, rallying the troops around him through the chaos. He actually reaches the base of the fort, plants the flag, and holds it upright.
Okay, so what does this all mean? I've always struggled to understand the tactical logic of a flag bearer in historical combat.
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Totally. You're completely unarmed, your hands are full, and you're holding a massive, brightly colored target that literally draws enemy fire.
Yeah, from a pure survival standpoint, it's a terrible idea.
Right. He's bleeding out, near lifeless, but even when he is finally rescued, he is reluctant to give the flag to his rescuers. Why prioritize a piece of cloth over your own survival?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, You have to place yourself in the sensory deprivation of a 19th century battlefield.
Okay.
There are no radios.
Yeah.
The smoke from black powder weapons is incredibly thick. It blocks out the sun. The noise of artillery is deafening.
So you can't see or hear anything.
Right. In that environment, the flag isn't merely a piece of fabric. It is the sole structural anchor of the entire regiment.
Oh, I get it. It's the only way a soldier knows where their unit is.
Exactly. It shows where the line of advance is and whether the unit is still in the fight.
So if the flag goes down, the assumption is that the vanguard has fallen, and that triggers a panic or a retreat.
Precisely. The flag was the psychological heart of the unit. Kearny understood that dropping it meant shattering the morale of his fellow soldiers.
Wow.
Where refusing to let it touch the ground, despite massive blood loss and agonizing pain, he was physically absorbing the brutality of the enemy just to keep the spirit of his regiment alive.
That perfectly embodies that core requirement of self-sacrifice.
It really is the purest distillation of putting the mission and the men beside you above your own survival.
It totally defies biology. Like, to keep your muscles locked around a flagpole when your nervous system is shutting down from trauma, it requires a level of willpower that is almost frightening to think about.
It really is.
So we've looked at two intensely different examples so far, the strategic sabotage of Private Parrott and the frontline combat endurance of Sergeant Kearny.
Both incredible, but both traditional soldiers.
Right, both operating within a combat framework. Which begs the question, can someone earn the military's highest honor for valor without ever carrying a weapon?
The historical record provides an emphatic yes to that question.
Okay.
The parameters of valor aren't strictly confined to dealing death or blowing up infrastructure. They also encompass the profound courage required to preserve life under impossible conditions.
And this brings us to Dr. Mary Edwards Walker.
Yes. To this day, she holds the distinction of being the only woman to ever receive the Medal of Honor.
She was a civilian volunteer surgeon operating right in the middle of the Civil War. Just arriving at that battlefield requires a distinct type of bravery.
Absolutely. She placed herself in an environment of unimaginable trauma. Field medicine in the 1860s was rudimentary and brutal.
And she was right in the thick of it.
She was. But her inclusion as a Medal of Honor recipient goes beyond just treating the wounded behind secure lines. In April 1864, the Confederate Army captured her.
Wait, so she transitions from a volunteer surgeon to a prisoner of war.
Exactly.
And the sources mention she endured severe hardships during her captivity. We know that Civil War prison camps, places like Andersonville, were notorious for starvation, disease, and exposure.
Men died by the thousands in those camps.
So to endure that environment as a female POW, it adds a layer of vulnerability and psychological strain that is just difficult to even measure. Instead of running into enemy lines to destroy things, she was running into the chaos to fight death itself.
That's a great way to put it. She survived an environment designed to break the human spirit. And upon her eventual release, her response wasn't to retreat to safety.
No.
No, she leveraged her experience and was given a commission as an acting assistant surgeon. She became the very first female physician in the United States Army.
I want to look closely at the specific wording of her citation, which President Andrew Johnson signed in 1865.
Very revealing.
Yeah, the source material notes that she devoted herself with much patriotic zeal to the sick and wounded soldiers to the detriment of her own health, and has also endured hardships as a prisoner of war.
This raises an important question about how we view heroism.
Yeah, the phrase "to the detriment of her own health" really stands out to me.
It forces us to expand our definition of self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because we often view valor as a split-second decision.
Right.
A sudden surge of adrenaline where someone jumps on a grenade.
Right.
But Dr. Walker's citation recognizes a slow burn of sacrifice. It's the grueling, sustained endurance of exposing your own immune system to disease, exhausting your physical stamina to save shattered bodies, and suffering the prolonged torture of captivity.
It fundamentally reframes what it means to go above and beyond the call of duty, proving that enduring captivity and dedicating your life to saving others is just as courageous as any act of combat.
Absolutely.
Looking at these three recipients side by side provides this incredible spectrum of what valor actually is. You have a private who dismantled a train to cripple an army, a sergeant who used his own wounded body as an anchor for his regiment, and a female surgeon who willingly walked into the horrors of a prison camp to heal the broken.
It's a spectrum of heroism that the military and the nation continue to study and honor today.
Which brings our deep dive into the present moment, because the legacy of these individuals is formally recognized every year. March 25 is observed annually as National Medal of Honor Day.
And that date is a direct callback to the exact day in 1863 when Private Jacob Parrott and his fellow volunteers received those very first medals.
So the sources actually outline a few highly specific ways that you, listening right now, can actively participate in honoring these individuals today.
It doesn't have to be a grand, sweeping gesture.
Right. It starts with visibility. Just proudly flying the American flag at your home as a nod to the symbol the Sergeant Carney sacrificed so much to protect.
The sources also suggest grounding this history in your local community.
Taso.
Well, you can research and visit a local gravesite. There are databases available where you can check if a Medal of Honor recipient is buried in your hometown or a neighboring city.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Standing at the physical resting place of someone who met that criteria, it makes the history tangible in a way reading a book simply cannot.
You can also look inward at your own family tree.
Yeah.
Taking the time to honor family members who served connects you to that broader lineage of sacrifice.
And perhaps the most vital action is simply passing the knowledge on. Tell your friends or family about how Jacob Parrott stole a train.
Yeah. Explain the tactical reality of William Carney holding the colors. Share the endurance of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. Oral history is incredibly powerful.
And on a national scale, there's a tradition where living Medal of Honor recipients gather at Arlington National Cemetery to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier.
Wow.
It's a moment where the most conspicuously brave individuals of our modern era pay their respects to those whose ultimate sacrifices remain entirely anonymous.
It's a heavy but really necessary reminder of the cost of the world we live in. You know, we began this deep dive looking at the stark contrast between everyday recognition and the unimaginable threshold for this medal. But after analyzing the sources, I think there's a deeper unifying thread here.
When you break down their biographies, a clear pattern emerges. We're not looking at mythical superheroes bred for combat.
No, we're looking at an ordinary volunteer, private, a former civilian who became a sergeant, and a volunteer female surgeon.
Everyday human beings thrust into terrifying circumstances.
Exactly. And that reality leaves us with a final lingering thought to carry forward. Knowing that the medal requires putting one's life on the line and looking at these ordinary individuals, it means the capacity for absolute fearlessness is a dormant feature of the human condition.
It exists in everyday people.
So it makes you wonder, if ordinary people from completely different walks of life can discover that profound level of courage when the moment demands it, what untapped capacity for bravery resides within the rest of us? Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.